So can we just sit down now? Come back up.
You need to say something and so that I'll move.
So today I have roped in, as part of the Basics series, my long-suffering partner, Rochelle.
When he said I thought I'm doing a Basics series. So obviously I'm a functioning human. I do have some knowledge on things, but if you actually sat me down and was like, right, explain the different types of things, there's a lot of areas where I definitely would come stuck. Mainly because I'm like, finance, give it to that guy.
So we'll dive into question one first, obviously.
It's question 10.
Okay.
So what are the things involved with personal finance and what should I be thinking about? But I'm probably not.
Yeah, so probably the big thing I would say is firstly just to get a track of your spending. So the number one golden rule of personal finance is spend less than you earn. So what you really need to be thinking about is tracking all your finances. Do that for a month or two or a couple of months and see if you can get a bit of consistency about what's coming in and what's going out. That in itself will be quite a good exercise, and you'll learn a lot about your finances from doing that, and that's a really good starting point. It's just about taking a little bit of control. After that, you need to think about your overall picture and protecting yourself against disaster. Now, you can do this in a couple of ways. You could firstly just build up an emergency saving so that if something were to happen, you can dip into that. But also you need to be thinking about the things that aren't going to potentially happen as much, but could have a really devastating impact on your financial position. So this is things like income protection. If you were to suffer a long-term illness, if you were to pass away, what would happen to your family? And then once you've done all of that, you can then look to potentially invest wisely, which is where you're going to potentially grow your wealth.
So what are the best ways to save / what are the best accounts in order to save? Promise I have savings.
Yeah, so I think people overcomplicate this. To be honest, once you've started saving, that's the best thing. So you just need to kind of start, really. So that can be just through your current account. How I do it personally is I have just a separate savings account in my bank. I think I mentioned that in 5 essential tips to save money fast. But yeah, that works because basically what you want to do is you want to try and increase the mental accounting element of it where you're separating your money and like, right, I'm not going to touch that. It just builds good habits. It keeps you more accountable to yourself. It's just generally a better thing to do. As far as what type of accounts, the problem we've got right now is that it's really, really, really difficult to get any sort of meaningful savings account, which is going to get you any sort of near inflation return. I think NS&I, which are basically savings through the government, they're one of the strongest at the moment. But you can look into all the Martin Lewis stuff where he talks about like kind of going from different banks and all the rest of it. As from my side, I've never really seen there being a huge benefit in doing that because it's like you go from having 0.5% to 0.7% or maybe 1.1. As far as the overall big picture stuff with your finances, it's not going to make any difference. It's just not enough to really make a substantial difference to your finances. What you need to do is you need to put yourself in a position where you've got enough saved, ideally 3 to 6 months, and then that means that if something were to happen, you lose your job, something unexpected comes, the boiler goes, you're not having to dip into debt. That's kind of the main thing really, because that's where people tend to get into trouble. So that would probably, the first thing I would say is just start if you haven't already got any savings. Just kind of while I'm mentioning debt, actually, that's an interesting one. You didn't ask, but let's go into it.
Well, so it's like, just please save.
Yeah, please save.
For both of us, please save.
Yeah.
I do save, but it's...
You do save. Yeah.
It's just, you wonder sometimes because there's different accounts available and, sometimes you do hear people, say, oh, you could get a better deal if you switched or there's better savings on this one or that one. But is it kind of a muchness of a muchness then?
Yeah, so switching on banks can be useful if you can be bothered because you can get like 150, 200 quid or whatever from switching some banks. So that can be useful because it's actually quite easy to do that. It's obviously all individual, depends on your personal circumstances. But I think, what kind of the Martin Lewis stuff is kind of really focused on, maximising your returns and, from savings and then also reducing your bills. And that's a great thing to do. But at some point, you've got to realise that cash in itself is only going to get you so far, because in this current environment, or certainly in the environment we've been for the last 10 years, what's happening is that your return is only just keeping up in line with inflation. So once you get to 3 to 6 months of savings, you're just not making the money work for you. Now, the question is whether it's right for you to take a level of investment risk, and that's a bigger, more personal question. But the end of the day, it's really, really hard to become financially secure by relying purely on cash savings, because you've got inflation eating away, and it's just very, very difficult to kind of go up against that uphill struggle. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm rambling.
It does make sense. But we'll circle back to how I don't have investments later.
Hello.
So what are the pros and cons to overdrafts and loans?
Cool. Okay. So, well, I guess the pros for both is that it gives you access to money that you don't technically have. That's a
good pro.
yeah, it is technically. So that's the main benefit, really. As far as just the difference between the two, okay, so an overdraft is basically what happens when you've got normally a bank account and you go overdrawn. So there are two main types. There's an arranged overdraft and there's the unarranged one. They both potentially could have charges with your bank, so you need to really check that and see what happens if you do happen to go overdrawn, how much they charge, if there's an interest rate, whatever. Just get a good handle of that, because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to be putting yourself into a false sense of security where you're living in your overdraft, because the bank can call back on it any time. And also, you ultimately, some of these charges on accounts, if you're not careful, can be really quite high. So definitely keep a track of that, and double check the position with your bank if you are going to use an overdraft. As far as a loan, the main difference is with it, it's a bit more formal as far as arranging it. So what you will tend to do is you can often get access to a higher amount as far as lending. Normally an overdraft for most people, unless you're extremely wealthy, will probably be a couple of hundred, maybe £1,000 or a bit more. A loan, you can get it potentially for much higher, but you'll have to go in and arrange it with the bank. It'll all be subject to your credit history. They'll probably want to know why. Maybe they won't. So you need to check that. As far as which is cheaper, it's very difficult for me to give kind of like a definitive answer, because this is really where the devil's in the detail. You need to check the interest rate on your loan. A loan is likely to be more structured because you'll have a set amount of payments you've got to make, and often the interest rate can be a bit lower, but it does really depend. As far as both, ideally, as far as getting to a better position with your finances, you don't really want to be incurring debts unless you absolutely have to be, because the phrase dead money is pretty fair, because you are paying the bank to lend this money. Now, obviously, there are some times in life where you just need to do that, and that's completely fair enough. It happens, but it's just something to think twice about, because you're not benefiting from paying them interest, and it's something that especially if you let debts accumulate, it just drags down your financial position. So it puts you, and over time, it's going to reduce your net worth. It's going to give you less opportunities. So something definitely to be pretty careful on.
So what exactly are all the different elements when it comes to buying a property?
Sure, okay. So the first thing to do is to get a deposit. So if you haven't already looked into the government support schemes, that's a really good thing to do. Look at a lifetime ISA, certainly worth having a look at. It really does depend if you know that you're definitely putting that money for that purpose, though, because if you do take a lifetime ISA and withdraw it as something which is not for your first home or potentially for retirement, then you're going to get a penalty. This is assuming this is your first property as well, because if you've had a property before, you're not going to be able to use the lifetime ISA. Once you've done that, you can also then start having a look at getting your finances in order, check your credit score and all the rest of it, because this is going to affect what amount of mortgage you can get. So you also want to be looking at the area, doing extensive research of where you want to live. Obviously it's going to be a long-term purchase, so basically just do your research. There are various calculators online that you can use to calculate how much you potentially can borrow. So once you've all got that done, you've got the deposit ready, you're now kind of looking to get into a decent position where you're actually in a position to put in an offer. What you want to do firstly is get a mortgage in principle. So you go to prospective lenders and see what they'd be willing to offer you. So again, This is why making sure that your income and expenditures in a good position is wise, because that's likely going to affect the mortgage they're willing to offer you. Once you've done that, you can register with estate agents, and basically start viewing properties. So once you've got your mortgage in principle, you register with estate agents, you're viewing properties, you're then pretty much in the position to maybe put in an offer. Now, just one thing to bear in mind is if this is your first property, you're actually in quite a position of strength, because if you're not in a chain, you're in a position to potentially make an offer quite quickly, it being accepted, and it'll be a more streamlined process, which is what the seller is likely going to want. So just bear that in mind when you're doing negotiations. But let's say you've got a property you like, you've made an offer. After that, you need to then get conveyancing done, which is the legal process for purchasing a property, and then a property survey as well. And now this is where things can often fall apart, because the property survey will look into the condition of the property, and also if there's any particular issue with it, anything you need to be aware of before purchasing it. So once you've done all that, you're pretty much in a position then to have everything accepted. So I think that's everything. You've got from start to finish, and then at the end you've complete the contracts, assuming everything goes ahead.
So now I have a house.
Now you have a house.
You're already laughing at my question.
I'm already laughing at your question.
Okay. So, should everyone have investments? Because I don't, and I don't understand them.
Okay.
I know the concept of investing, I should say, but
Good.
I don't know. It scares me, to be honest.
Glad to see you watching my channel. Okay.
Fine.
The problem that you've got is if you don't invest, is that, and the Financial Conduct Authority came and said this when they did an evaluation of the retail distribution review. They basically said that too many people are just holding money in cash. We're sort of a nation of savers more than investors at this moment in time. If you're not happy with ever taking a level of risk, and you're someone who, despite attempts at education, just isn't happy with it, then it doesn't sound like investing is right for you. But you're still going to be affected by the forces of investments, which is basically why do investments go up and down. It's often a lot of times linked to how companies do, which is linked to how the economy does. So you can't really escape it, whether you invest or you don't. The issue that you've got currently in this environment is that cash is earning a very small amount of return, and we would expect, based on the level of return you're getting from cash, that basically you're not going to be growing your wealth. In fact, you're probably going to have a position going forward where your cash is getting eroded in buying power because of inflation. Now, that didn't always used to be the case, but it is now, and it's not really expected to change for the foreseeable. It's probably one of my worst graphics, but I did, at the end of the 3 golden rules of personal finance, I did a comparison. Yeah, link again. I did a comparison between an assumption on growth versus an assumption on cash and inflation, and it's the difference between the two you need to get your head round about whether you should invest. Because yes, you're taking a level of risk, but the difference of those two figures over something which is getting eaten by inflation compared to something that can grow can be huge over your lifetime, and that is going to have a big impact on all the big things you want from your life, be it to retire early, be it to have the financial freedom to do other things. The trade-off is that you take a level of risk. So you've got to go in, being an adult about it and being like, I know I'm not guaranteed a return, but there are lots of ways that you can spread that risk, so what you're doing would be considered to be quite sensible. So in answer to your question, no, you don't have to have investments. But I think kind of actually almost the point of the channel, because our education system doesn't really teach about personal finance, about how investments work and all the rest of it. What often happens is that people sort of make the assumption and they say like, oh, I just don't understand investments, don't get into it. So the kind of the decision is being done on an assumption instead of maybe us actually spending a bit of time trying to get the education position right with it. Because from my point of view, if it's a conscious choice, you just don't want to do it, fair enough. But I don't think, considering how much of a massive impact it can have on people's lives, I think it's something that we need to kind of invest a bit of time to try and make sure everyone understands, and then If you want to also make a conscious decision not to do it, fair enough, but we shouldn't be laying it lie at an assumption. So thanks very much for watching. I think what I'm going to do is, we were originally planning to do 10 questions, but I think some of the questions I've answered have been a bit long, so I'm going to cut them up and do 2 5 questions.
It was too much to explain.
There was too much to explain. So what we're going to do is I'll throw in the other episode at another time. If you did happen to like it, please do like it. You know, put it in the comments. I hate asking for it. So,
I'll ask for it. Like it.
right, see you next time.